Thanks for coming to our Faith and Activism panel discussion hosted by the New Hampshire Socialist Coalition. I'm Zoe Wroten-Heinzmann. I'm going to be moderating this discussion, but I'm hoping it will be pretty free-flowing with our panelists, and if you have any questions, you can say those to the end, and hopefully we'll get a chance to get to them. So I'm joined today by Chris DiLoreto, the Wizard of Monadnock, podcaster, Dave Capozzi from the Brockton Covenant Church in Massachusetts, Imam Coley from the newly opening MALIC Center in Keene, and Rick Durance, the youth minister of the UCC in Keene. And so we'll start off with a couple minutes for each panelist to introduce themselves and tell us about their faith background and their activism background in just a couple minutes.
Sounds great. Well, thank you again, everybody, for coming. Really appreciate it. I am a last-minute fill-in. We had a couple cancellations, so I agreed to help out and step in. I actually helped found the New Hampshire Socialist Coalition, as well as the Socialist Party of Southern New Hampshire. So in addition to my work with these two groups, I am a member of this church, so I am a Unitarian Universalist. And I also write a blog called The Wizard of Monadnock, and I have a podcast as well where I kind of explore spirituality and things like that. Me personally, I draw a lot of faith inspiration from multiple sources. Christianity, earth-based traditions, Taoism, and some other kind of miscellaneous stuff. So as you might imagine, a UU church is a good home for me. And one of the reasons we wanted to put this panel on in the first place is, this is something that I kind of take through my day-to-day life. I mean, I have a very, in addition to my regular job and my family, a very busy political schedule that I often have to try to reconcile with my spiritual life. And the interesting interplay between that spiritual life and the political activism, that really, they kind of inform each other. There's a bit of a dialectic, if I may say so, there. So happy to be here, and thank you.
Hello, I'm Dave Capozzi. I'm from Brockton, Massachusetts. I'm a pastor there. I come from an evangelical background, which is a really great and popular thing in our country right now. And I say that not because I'm proud of it, but because that's who I am. Today, I have been a pastor for about 3 years. Previous to that, I worked in and among homeless communities in Brockton and Quincy for 7 years. And before that, I worked in finance. So I've had a pretty varied background in my life. And in terms of activism, I've been centrally involved with criminal justice reform in Massachusetts right now, of which we're having some major reform happen right now in the state, and also in immigration reform. So I'm involved with our Brockton interfaith community, and we work mostly with Christian churches, because that's mostly all we have, and there are some Jewish communities as well. But yeah, for me, I draw from, like Chris, all sorts of spiritual influences. But in terms of Christian wing, I'm mostly influenced by Anabaptism and liberation theology.
I'm William Coley. I am the Imam of the MALIC Center, Masjid al-Latif and Interfaith Community Center. We will be opening, inshallah, on this Saturday, is the hope. That's the plan, at least. As far as my background, I started lecturing on Islam and Islamic jurisprudence at the University of Central Florida and Valencia Community College in 2008, 2009. I started the Orlando Now Project, which was an effort after being refused the opportunity to get qualified Islamic speakers at Florida universities. We created a project that was bringing them and utilizing free speech areas at universities to have those speakers have the opportunity to have an audience on campuses. Went on from there to host a radio show in Orlando on WORL 660. Worked cut my teeth in activism giving lectures about Islamic jurisprudence and Sharia to hostile Tea Party groups in Florida. Yeah. Moved from there to Tennessee and testified before the Senate Judiciary Committees for the anti-Sharia bills. Again, gave a number of lectures to Tea Party groups, put together a coalition of 12 Tea Party groups to condemn the anti-Sharia legislation and actually rally against it in Eastern Tennessee. Then from then I founded an organization called Muslims for Liberty, and we have gone to liberty and conservative events from the Republican Liberty Caucus to the Libertarian National Convention and other smaller local events, and lectured on Islam and Islamic jurisprudence, trying to demystify as well as cast aside common tropes and stereotypes and lecture about the Islamic legal theory as it actually exists in history, not the mainland stereotypes we see on television. Through that, we ended up in New Hampshire at a festival called the Porcupine Freedom Fest in Lancaster the last 4 years, where we gave away about 3,000 free meals each year, and were donated a building in Keene through that effort to open the first freestanding mosque in the state of New Hampshire. There are 2 other mosques that are under construction, but they're not done. So that will make us, inshallah, the first. My political work, I was the runner-up to the Libertarian Party's vice presidential candidacy nomination in 2016. And I have worked on political campaigns in Pakistan, Kenya, South Africa, worked with economic civil disobedience movements in Malaysia, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and a number of other Muslim countries. But to become an imam and give the proper focus to that, I walked away from political activism about 6 months ago. So that's me.
Hi, I'm Rick Durance. I'm the youth pastor at Keene United Church of Christ. My background is I previously got involved with both the intersection of faith and activism in 2009, where I worked in Ann Arbor, Michigan with the Interfaith Council for Peace and Justice, one of the oldest peace organizations founded around the turn of the century. So it's been really exciting to have that history. In working from there, I ended up running a crisis hotline and a outdoor ministry in San Francisco with San Francisco Night Ministry. Working from there, I ran a soup kitchen in New Haven, Connecticut for about 2 years, one of the state's largest soup kitchens. What was then really exciting is I ended up going to University of Chicago for my divinity school, where I specialized in public theology and figuring out ways of applying and practicing activism as I had experienced it in a faith-based setting. That then led me to becoming involved with the United Church of Christ, in particular in Chicago, so Trinity United Church of Christ and my home parish, University Church. I then became involved starting in October with Keene United Church of Christ being called as their youth pastor.
And how about your activism work? Do you want to talk a little bit about projects you've worked on?
Absolutely. So there's been a huge variety of things I've worked with, ranging from working to stop School of the Americas and WinSec through SOA Watch, participating with the new sanctuary movement, in particular how I've engaged with that in Chicago by our church, University Church, ended up hosting an undocumented family who were threatened with deportation, and we provided them support both financially and also politically to make sure that this deportation order was stopped. I ended up advocating for things like an increase in food stamps in the state of Connecticut, where it was one of the few places where, in response to some of the initial farm bill reductions, we ended up saying, no, we actually need to increase this. We were not ultimately successful, but one of the great things that has come forward with this is that the farm bill is seen as an overarching set of legislative pieces, which isn't just agricultural bills, but also functions in the wider food policy network. So it's been exciting to be involved in things like that.
So I want to dig a little bit deeper into the relationship between the political life and the faith life, because you mentioned, Chris, like wanting to entwine yours more, and you mentioned wanting to separate yours more. So I want to start, let the two of you start by talking more about that, and then we can move.
Yeah.
Could you guys all speak up, please, because they're practicing it, you know?
Yeah, no problem. Yeah, so definitely, and this, I guess how I would phrase this is not so much that I necessarily need to intertwine my faith work and my political organizing together, so much as recognize how intertwined they already are and always have been in my life. And it's really easy in the day-to-day to think of them as separate things, separate tasks, you know. They seem so different. In a lot of ways, they seem unrelated if I don't really stop and think about it. And when I do, I kind of realize if I ever stop and say, well, why do I do this? Or why do I spend all of my time doing these things, you know? It's not because it's certainly not because it's the most fun activity that I could be doing, you know, or the most enjoyable thing, particularly after, say, like a long day of work. What it really comes down to is my political beliefs and my spiritual ones, and the activities that derive from each of them. They come from the same source. They actually really do come from a deep-seated belief and faith that is not always easy to articulate. And that's really my struggle, is trying to find ways to actually consciously understand this about my own life. But I would say that my political work and my faith work, they feed off of one another.
Well, for me, it's the same on that level, but because of the fact that I'm changing my role in the community. Before, I was an activist who, because of like where I grew up in East Tennessee, I looked like everybody's cousin Bob. You know, like throw a pair of overalls on. I mean, you see the boots that I'm wearing right now. I mean, like I normally would have on like a Justin Roper hat, and I've got on like just a regular old black long sleeve shirt underneath the skin up right now. So I look like everybody's cousin Jim Bob. So that gives me the ability to go in and work as a defender of our community in places that, you know, Brother Ahmed or, you know, Sister Khadija, you know, who are glowing beacons of like, look at me, I'm different than you, you know, in these settings where being that glowing beacon may not be the best thing for you. I mean, I've literally had events where I went and confronted anti-Muslim speakers during the question and answer session, but I had an organizer pull a pistol out on me in the town that I grew up in. Like at the high school my dad went to high school in, they're doing an event, and I asked a question that the anti-Muslim speaker couldn't answer because, you know, I've spent 13 years of my life studying it, 6 years study, and 6 years lecturing at universities on the subject. You're a pastor who can't properly pronounce most of the terms, and you're giving a lecture. You know, so that was my position before. I was an activist. That was where my focus was to go out and be that person. And I also ran political campaigns. I went out and recruited Muslims to run for office. I ran for office myself, and that kind of work requires a specific amount of focus. And now that I'm an imam, and I now have a community of 20 families that are my responsibility in many, many ways, I don't feel that I can do the things I did before and give the job I have now the proper attention and the proper, you know, effort that it deserves. So it's not so much that I need to separate the two sets of values as it is that I can't be a politician and a political activist and all those things and be an imam in the way that I feel it needs to be done. Does that make sense?
It does. Yeah. It helps that I'm not a clergy person, you know.
Yeah.
Do you want to add to that or follow up on that thought about how these kinds of work are intertwined for you? I apologize, I'm losing my voice. I'll do my best to project. I'm trying to sing this morning, nothing was coming out, so this is better than nothing.
I'd say I resonate with both statements that were made. I'd just say for me, faith and politics are an unnecessary bifurcation. They're two worlds that we create because we need to compartmentalize things. Politics is essentially life in the city, and so this is a political event. And what you did this morning in church or in your mosque or wherever, that was a political event. Because it affects families, it affects the way that things function in the city. So for me, the way that I, as a pastor, am an activist or am active within my community or within politics is that I have people, families that I care for, and I listen to their struggles. And because I have a voice with people who hold positions of power, I can speak truth to those people based on what I'm discerning within my community or the needs. So I got involved in mass incarceration because I have people who were affected by this sickness. I got involved with immigration because we have undocumented people within my congregation. So for me, now I know their struggle, I can speak on their behalf. Or, even better, encourage them to speak for themselves if they feel able to, or that. So for me, the best way that I can participate is to not see the difference. I think as soon as we see the difference, and I'll say this from the evangelical perspective. You see within evangelical churches people saying, we don't tell you who to vote for, but by the way, this is pro-life Sunday. You know, so there's this stream, this undercurrent of, there's politics very alive in church. They're telling you what to think, who to vote for, all that. But they won't say that they are. For me, it's just naming. These are the things that we stand for as people of faith. This is what justice looks like, and that's broad. Folks from Muslim and Jewish and Hindu and Buddhist communities can all affirm very similar ideals of justice. And so we pursue those things together. And for me, it springs out of my life of faith. And I resonate that I can't be out doing the same things that I used to, but it just looks a little bit different. I'm encouraging people to do what I was doing before.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Our job is no longer to be that voice out there on the street. Our job is to basically empower the people in our community that we see to be better than we were at doing that thing. Those young up-and-comers. That's why the first thing that we bought was the nursery. I bought the nursery before we bought the carpets. Really? Because the young people coming up, those are the ones, they're going to change what we've been fighting. Yeah. You know, as much as, because we're getting old. Yeah. As much as we don't want it, you know, I'm getting close to 40. We're not going to be able to do the things that we did when we were 20. So our job as the leaders in the communities is to teach and empower and raise up that next generation to go out there and defeat those dragons that we were only able to fight against.
That's good. Yeah.
Now let's say on the faith formation perspective, so as a youth pastor, I would also second the idea that we're here to empower, and in a really interesting way, I think for a long time we've seen faith formation in terms of things like Sunday school, so that faith and politics are sort of bifurcated and to some degree siloed, so that it's all about one's personal faith and memorizing particular scriptural passages and not understanding that the other side to this is that we are an integral part of building citizens in a real tangible fashion. And that means in sort of an example that I'm teaching the kids right now how to write their legislatures and advocate for particularly progressive policies that would empower on things like LGBT equality for our elders, which there's a really fabulous bill going forward to try and make sure that there's none of this discrimination going on, particularly for faith-based retirement communities that are actually a big deal right now, so that by advocating for these type of LGBT equality, that we're living out our progressive cred, for lack of a better phrase, as a progressive church, while then also teaching our kids about the various processes which are important to understand in how they can write their legislators about that this needs to be advocated for, understanding how the various parts of the healthcare system work, and how our elders are being treated, and being able to advocate for that. So there's a great follow-up today that in the places that we were writing about various legislation in the past couple weeks, we're now writing to these particularly LGBT elders who are affected by this right now. So we're sending out Christmas cards to our LGBT elders now. So being able to mesh the two is actually, in a lot of ways, my job, what I need to be doing for these young folks going forward, and being able to say that politics and faith are the same, and that we need to be forming our kids for both and being able to make sure that they're being empowered citizens, because our institutions outside of the church and in other settings aren't doing what this is supposed to be. That public schooling in general is not empowering the kids to act in independent citizenry fashion, but rather to take standardized tests which may or may not have any efficacy. So it's an exciting opportunity going forward.
So do you feel, and anyone else can jump in on this one too, do you feel that there's an obligation as a religious leader to also be a political leader?
I would say so.
Or political actor in some way?
So as a 501c3, it's hard to talk about all facets of politics because you can't advocate for particular candidates. On the other hand, I have to say that I think keeping our kids involved in what policies are going on in their community and how they can affect that is, I think, a mandate, to be perfectly honest, especially as a UCC church that states that we are racially reconciling, that we want to have peace in the Middle East, that we're trying to advocate for healthcare for everyone, that Black Lives Matter. As we're making these statements as a denomination and as individual congregations, we need to be teaching our kids both what that faith component is and how to live those out in their lives when other aspects of existence, whether it's the media or anything else, are telling them that this is not important or not to do that. So I would say that there's a mandate to be able to empower our kids to engage in policy discussions, engage in democracy, things like that.
Well, I would say that one of the roles of the mosque, the church, the temple is to inculcate our children with a concept of justice. Mm-hmm. But to couch justice itself in political language sometimes is a little self-serving. Like, we have our own personal agendas that we are in when we start using, like, instead of advocating that justice is justice for all people, say Black Lives Matter. Well, now, when you say Black Lives Matter, now it's a political statement. It's no longer advocating justice is justice for all. It's a political statement that is couched in a language that can be considered left-wing or right-wing. Like if someone stood up and said taxation is theft because they believed that, Matthew was a tax collector and that was bad, or because the majority of Islamic scholarly has stated that income taxes are oppression. If someone said that as taxation is theft, well, that's a political slogan. It's on 1,000 bumper stickers. Well, now it's a political statement. You're no longer teaching, well, our faith teaches this particular view. You're now couching it in a political language that I feel it's self-serving, in that we're trying to push them to kind of accept what our personal views are instead of allowing them to learn the faith. This is why I stepped back from political activism. It's because I didn't want to find myself couching my lessons in the way I was presenting the information as trying to encourage people to accept my political views on any number of subjects. My job is to teach the faith as it is. This is what the faith teaches. This is how we should treat others. This is how we should treat our neighbors. All of these extra political compartmentalizations that are thrown in by the media or by your college professor or by kids you go to school with or whatever thing that you're involved with, that's commentary that's added to it that could, again, cloud your ability to teach them how to establish justice in their own communities, because now they're going to be looking for some political thing to latch onto instead of latching onto God. Now they're just going to run, and you see it with the MSAs today. At an MSA today, there are many things that are straight up Islamic orthodoxy. But if you say them, you will be marginalized by the Muslim Students Association, because the Muslim Students Association is now also in work with a particular political campus group. So now anything that doesn't fit that political group's views, whether it's Islamic orthodoxy or not, is bad. So you can't show up at that school as like your normal everyday Orthodox Muslim without being marginalized by members of your own community because you're not couching your religious language in the political agenda that is now being associated with. I'm hoping I'm making myself clear.
Yeah.
So I think it's really important that we just teach the lessons. Just teach the lessons as they are. We don't need to add the salt and pepper to it. It's the meat is good as it is. It's good as it is. We've been teaching it for thousands of years as it is, and now in the last 20 to 30 years, we want to add our own pastors want to add their political agenda. So you end up with Trump, or you end up with I don't know who the big left-wing pastor name is these days. But you end up with these, and they become competing views with each other, and now you have the church turned against itself. You have the mosques turned against themselves, because instead of just teaching the lessons, imams, rabbis, pastors, we put our own political agendas in with the lessons by using this kind of language. And I just think that's dangerous. Look around you. It's dangerous. We're living in the reality of how dangerous that is. We have entire denominations of Christianity that have rejected the entire notion of empathy, charity, compassion. You have entire Muslim populations who have completely rejected these concepts of empathy, charity, rahmah. Every chapter of our book is started with the invocation of rahmah. And you have entire millions of Muslims on earth who have no understanding concept of rahmah to be given to another person who's different than you. And it's all because imams and pastors and temple goers have injected their messages with this political language. I think that's dangerous. I personally have made it a mission of my own to avoid that and encourage other pastors and leaders to do the same.
As a pastor, you
Yeah,
respond?
I agree. I think so. The roots of Christian faith are Jewish. It's Jewish faith, and in Judaism, they ask a lot of questions, and we've lost that art. In general, in religion, we've embraced modern enlightenment, and even in terms like orthodoxy, I struggle with because questions invite more and more questions, more and more pondering, more and more imagination. For me, that's where the life is. And so the way that I pastor, I very much agree. The way that I pastor, we had a recent conversation on faith and nationalism. And it'd be far too easy for me to stand up and say nationalism is wrong. It is bad. It is unhealthy. All of those things are true, I believe. But I need people to get to that conclusion on their own. And so what we did is we took the text, we split the room in half. We had one group read Romans 12. We had the next group read Romans 13. If any of you know those two texts, they seem to contradict each other. One talks about the marks of a true Christian. The next talks about how you should submit to the state. And so it's this very confusing. But it was a rich conversation. People asked questions. No one threw anything at one another. And for me, I think that we do go off the rails a bit when we become an extension of our nation's religion. Like we're basically the state religion. No matter which faith practice we have, if it extends further the ideals and values that are played out in municipalities and in the town square, who'd you vote for, this or that thing, those are questions to be had, but that's not the role of the faith community. We're called upon to ask questions about the deeper truths that will bring life to those conversations. And so I think for me, that is a rare, there's a stream of that within Christian churches, but I do think that's a rare thing. I think in general what you're talking about is rare. That people don't first and foremost go to the agenda first, but people often go first and foremost to the agenda and not to the questions that are behind it.
People will literally church shop to find the agenda that they agree with.
Absolutely.
Yep. Yeah, well, one of the things that I find interesting about the Unitarian Universalist faith in particular is that, as many know, or maybe not, we have theological diversity in the UU faith. We don't have a fixed theology. It is, to use a typically political term, we are multi-tendency. But as our pastor, Reverend Diana McLean, likes to say, she actually repeated it again this morning, the common perception is that here in the UU Church, you can believe whatever you want. And that's why we come here, because we don't want a challenging faith. We don't want we don't want to be forced into anything. We can do whatever we want here. But it's not entirely true. We are bound by 7 principles that are general and they are broad. But I would give as example the first principle, which is that we affirm the inherent worth and dignity of all human beings. Now we take that principle, and then it is up to all of us to wrestle with that. Well, so if I affirm that, if I truly affirm that as part of my faith, what does that mean for my action? And the church does not dictate that. The church does not answer that question. But we have to, in our congregations and in our families and in our individual lives, we have to wrestle with that. And the same is true going down the line throughout all the principles is, how does this become manifest in my life? And why? And this is an ongoing question that can be answered and wrestled with, I think, throughout life.
You sound like a Sufi.
Sufism's interesting.
I have tons of books you're welcome to come write one from the mosque anytime you like.
I would love to, yeah.
Well, so that gives me an opportunity to kind of switch gears here and talk about the sources. Christian activist tradition is something that a lot of us in our culture are familiar with. Reverend Martin Luther King Jr., abolitionists, there's a big history that we can all name examples from. But I wanted to ask you, is there a historical tradition of Muslim activism that you call upon?
Absolutely. Some of the greatest scholars of Islam were actually imprisoned by state actors for standing against those who would use faith as a way to oppress the public. You have the Hanafi madhab, which is one of the first. A madhab is that there's Sunni Islam has 4 main schools of thought. They call them madhabs. You have the Hanafi, the Hanbali, the Maliki, and the Shafi'i. Ahmed ibn Hanbal was the lucky one, and Imam Shafi'i was the lucky one. But Imam Malik and Abu Hanifa were both kidnapped by state authorities and tortured for refusing to teach a religious view that empowered the state. Imam Malik was literally tortured to the point that he couldn't raise his arms. Maliki political leadership was saying that if you were Muslim, you could treat non-Muslims in any way that you chose. And Imam Malik stood against that. And when he did, he was tortured and he was kidnapped by the state, arrested, if you want to use politically correct language. He was kidnapped by the state and tortured. My personal favorite scholar is Shihab al-Din al-Qaddafi. He is another scholar that stood in the 12th century when Maliki leadership was basically the size of an empire. I mean, they controlled vast swaths of territory. And again, the political leadership was saying that because of the Crusades, Muslims could treat non-Muslims among them in any way that they chose, that they could basically disregard their rights, that the maqasid didn't apply to them. And al-Qaddafi stood against that and preached against that and stood against the leaders of his own madhab. And today is one of the most celebrated Maliki scholars in antiquity because of the fact that he was imprisoned and tortured on multiple occasions. His book Al-Faruq is foundational for a lot of what you're seeing come out of this newly developing American Islamic tradition, which is being developed out of the old Maliki traditions. And they're a huge source of inspiration for myself. Then you also have scholars in the contemporary era, like Imam Zaid Shakir, who's the co-founder of the first Islamic university, Zaytuni University in California. He's also the founder of New Islamic Directions, and he teaches about being careful with crouching your religion in political language, and embracing a secular language instead of the language of compassion and love, which is the language of God and the language of faith. And the modern political language is about, I hate you, not I hate this thing that you do. And that is the new thing. Like, I hate racists, not I hate racism. I hate this person, not the idea that has infected them. And the dehumanization of those people. You have Hamza Yusuf, who's another inspiration for me because he's a white imam who went over there and spent 8 years walking through the deserts with Bedouin to learn the established tradition in a way that none of the imams today do. And he came back and he's spent the last almost 2 decades becoming one of the most renowned Islamic scholars in the world. And he talks about, again, the language of peace, standing against the oppressive regimes in these areas. And he always does it. I'm very, very like, I'm a hammer, there's a nail. He does it in a very veiled way so that the immigrant communities, they learn it, but they don't learn it in a way that they react to it in a visceral manner. You know, I'm talking to like libertarians and Republicans, so I can say like, the Saudi regime is crap. It's garbage. They're repressive. You can't really say that in some mosques because they own the mosques sometimes. So Hamza Yusuf has found a way to take this language and say, you know, look, the repressive views of Islam that you've been taught by these state-owned imams back in your home country is not the Islam that was taught 1,400 years ago. It's not the Islam of our Prophet ﷺ. It's not the Imam of the scholars. And he tries to teach that to them. And again, for me, that's so inspirational, you know, to see someone who, like, he looks like my cousin, and he's out here, and like Muslims love to hear him. He doesn't have to dress in a jilbab. He doesn't have to change his name. He doesn't have to look like them. All those things that when you convert to Islam, all those second guessings that you have because you're different than everybody there. You know, you're the lone white face in a sea of brown and black, and they all speak a language that is so important to the religion that you can't even understand yet. And your mouth is so lazy that you can't even pronounce words properly yet. And all of those things. And then to see this imam come out of that, who's teaching an Islam that is based in American values and Islamic values at the same time. You know, so yeah, I have lots of people that are out there that are inspirations, and if you want to learn from them, I can give you a whole list, and you can watch them on YouTube or rent books. And if you want, you're welcome to come to the mosque, and we have a library that you can rent books that they've written from, and take them home and read them yourself and get inspired yourself. Because everything they talk about is that all relationships in life with God revolve around the concept of the right of your neighbor, and that your neighbor doesn't mean the man that lives next door to you. Your neighbor means your fellow brother of Adam, the human being that you interact with every day or just today and never again. Greet those whom you know and those who you don't with salam, with peace. And that's the basis, and then everything else is complicated. So it's good. I love those guys. I love to read about them. I can sit and talk about them for hours, as you can see.
So I'll throw this to Chris next as the other non-Christian on the panel, and then I'll let you guys.
Well, I have to say, I can't top that in any way. You know, I honestly, as a non-Christian, sometimes I feel like one of my struggles may be that I don't have particular individuals that I necessarily look at from a particular faith tradition. I mean, the Unitarian Universalist faith is filled with social justice activists, you know, many of whom are not huge names. You know, they're not things you would recognize, but from the abolitionist movement on through to, you know, civil rights. They may have even been involved in the temperance movement, which was actually a faith-based movement at the time. And, you know, so this is a kind of a rich tradition in this particular faith that is, you know, kind of, I guess, goes beyond particular figures and is more of a current over time. And really, that's what I see in Christianity, you know, in those cases where I draw inspiration of, you know, from Christian figures in the 20th century, you know, like Dorothy Day comes to mind. Obviously, Reverend Martin Luther King is another one. I think even, and this is I'm going to name a much more complex figure, but even like a Malcolm X, I think, and you can see as someone who came through from the Nation of Islam and ended up towards the end of his life converting to Orthodox Islam, I believe. Yes, exactly, which I am one of those people that can't pronounce. my mouth is very lazy as far as that goes. We'll work on that. Right?
Yeah, right.
But this is an example of someone who lived his life wrestling and trying to answer these questions and trying to fight for his people in a way that is completely inseparable from faith traditions and beliefs and the nature of faith that were evolving as he lived. So I guess as a non-Christian, I do see people in multiple faiths, and I would actually like to learn more about the people that you just mentioned, because those are the stories that give me inspiration, even though I'm not a Muslim. I find it in a lot of different areas.
Absolutely.
I guess I'm a Christian, if you want to use those labels. Kidding. Sorry, I'm very sarcastic. I'm from Massachusetts. Are you guys also sarcastic? I know. My brother lived in Tennessee.
Oh, yeah, running out of it. Pick him up and put him on a chair and running out of the room.
I mentioned earlier Anabaptists. Now, Anabaptists were the real revolutionaries of the Reformation. Anabaptist means to be rebaptized. And the reason that was significant at the time is because baptism was associated with citizenship within the Roman Empire. And so as adults, some of these radicals were like, you know what, you reformers have gone, you're doing a pretty good job, but you haven't gone far enough. And so they said, you know what, I don't want to be associated with the Roman Empire. I want to be associated with the kingdom of God. And so they'd be baptized that way, and then they would proceed to be drowned or killed in some other fashion. And so for me, there's this, within the stream of Christian faith, Jesus, Yeshua, to be more accurate, himself was killed because he was a revolutionary, not because he loved people so well. And when you're a revolutionary, you usually are in trouble with the powers that be. So from the foundations of our faith, both Hebrew scriptures and Christian scriptures, you find prophets who are speaking truth to power. And so I'm always looking at those streams, and rarely am I interested in people who perpetuate powerful structures. So yes, Martin Luther King, Dietrich Bonhoeffer from around Nazi Germany, Gandhi, who very much combined lots of our faith traditions to pursue peace and freedom. And so I mentioned liberation theology as well. James Cone is a black liberation. He's the father of black liberation theology. If you're interested in some of his work, he's written a book called The Cross and the Lynching Tree that mixes, essentially, that says that Yeshua was in solidarity with those who were lynched in America in the 19th and early 20th century, or early to mid. Brilliant book. And so if you're interested in people from the Christian tradition who are not popular names, that's a person. And he's still active. I think he just retired from Union Theological Seminary. But the Christian faith tradition is so broad, and I've just given you the Western side of things. And so the Eastern side has lots of other things to offer that I'm not as well schooled in. But yeah, I think there's plenty there.
So I'll take an interesting sort of U-shaped discussion. So there's a bunch of medieval and Reformation era folks who I resonate with most as these are folks who on some level are very bookish like myself, but then also pretty radical. So the Franciscan and Dominican movements of the 13th through the 16th century were some of my great inspirations in my work, and what I actually applied to do PhD work in was some of these particular groups. And what was fascinating was these were folks who dedicated their lives to the study of scripture and religious tradition, but then also decided, hey, there are folks who are not being educated because we're not offering a public school system in any variety. Let's offer a school system that anybody can join and engage in. Let's change universities from these instruments of destruction and actually ways of engaging us. The project did not go as a lot of the early founders had hoped. That both the Franciscans and the Dominicans were unfortunately instrumental long-term by the fourth or fifth generation of folks in the conquest of the United States and the larger Western Hemispheric colonization efforts, which obviously are not things that we engage with, hopefully now as much as we can. But one of the problems then it becomes so there's these great people in the past who in general are very bookish like myself and who try and do good works. And their very good, wonderful works then get terribly corrupted. And so one of the things that gives me hope is that there's a number of us who especially are working on trying to reclaim this in a historically but also ethically responsible way of working on how do we talk about the environment now, which was a huge issue for these Dominicans and Franciscans. Talking about the very foundations and integrity of the earth were something that they really thought about, that they were on the cusp of watching the environmental destruction, which is now precipitated into climate change and all these terrible things now. They were seeing some of the early evidence of this, whether it was changes in how things were working with crops, and they were able to say, hey, something's going wrong, we need to be thinking about this. And they manifested in a very interesting form of apocalypticism, which I enjoyed. And unfortunately, how we and some of us engaging in the Christian tradition now are, how do we take these good ideas and separate them from the terrible ideas which have precipitated them? And so I really look to a lot of folks who are doing some great work. So I'm very thankful that the United Church of Christ and some of our other partner denominations are working with First People and Indigenous folks on things like stopping various pipelines all across the country. So the United Church of Christ has designated that no fossil fuel mining should be done with public funds at this particular point, which was one of the most revolutionary and wonderful things that's come out of General Synod in the last couple of years. And so supporting movements like that, which in some ways are in tandem with these really bookish, wonderful activists who I love from what feels like forever ago. So I think those are things that really keep me going, of figuring out ways of looking at the past and being able to adjudicate the injustices that folks have done, while also looking at all the wonderful stuff that we're working on now to offset what was these awful decisions and really corruptions of beautiful, pristine systems in a lot of ways.
So how do you decide like when an issue is going to be something that you'll support an ongoing project and work with another group, or when it's something that you want to provide charity, or when it's something that several other people on the panel mentioned, trying to figure out a way to empower people to tackle their own issues? How do you sort that out? What's your process of figuring out which projects to take on and how?
I think one of the things that's actually been really helpful, and I'm actually thankful for the previous generation, especially my teachers, the folks working in congregational ministry that have taught me. One of the great things is that these folks really took a risk in a lot of ways of supporting some really exciting opportunities that we've now made conscious partnerships, whether it's working on the New Sanctuary movement, which has been an intentional partnership that was forged by folks that were done before my time, but something that then is inculcated as a really important thing to be supporting now. And I continue these things. So there's those type of commitments. There's other stuff which has been really great, especially working in youth ministry, ministry that have come up from our youth, especially the new generation that have been affected by this. So gender justice is one of the most radical and wonderful things that post-millennials are working on right now. The ability to discuss transgender issues in a responsible and ethically pointed way is something I see in our young people that I have not seen even in my colleagues and my peers. So I'd really encourage folks to be listening to our teenagers on what gender justice is looking like right now. And that's one of the big things that I'm listening to and supporting on is how our young people are saying, this is important, and this is real, and this is happening, and this is something that the church needs to be involved with. And to some degree, the response then by those of us in leadership is saying, yeah, you're right, that this is really important. You've made an extraordinarily compelling case for why we need to be working for gender justice in this particular fashion.
I'm going to throw this one to you about charity work versus empowering people. And what's the difference and how do you?
Yeah. I often say that, especially this time of year, the church confuses charity with justice all the time. Charity is you doing something nice because either you want to feel good about yourself or you think that there's something that you can throw at a problem and come up with a solution. That's charity, in my opinion. Although the word has better roots than that, it has come to mean something different than its root. Justice to me is something different. I'd like to have there's something interesting in terms of the dialogue around gender and sexuality issues as they relate, especially in my denomination, in comparison to racial justice issues. Listening to folks within the black, now Brockton is a predominantly black community. Haitian American, African American, Cape Verdeans, so a little over 50%. Listening in those communities, I'm not hearing the same thing. There seems to be, from their perspective, a jump. Now, truth be told, I have a progressive view on human sexuality. But listening to the people that I'm in a relationship with, they feel like they're being jumped over, and that in terms of racial justice, they've been forgotten. It's, you know what, there's this new issue and it affects mostly white people, so we're going to deal with that. And so I struggle with, what do I do there? How do I guide this conversation within my community as a white male in a predominantly non-white space? And that's a hard thing. So to me, that kind of addresses your question in a way. How do you discern? What do you engage with and what don't you? And how do you engage with those things? I think when it comes to the upholding of human dignity, which I hear all of us trying to say, I think that you don't allow the bifurcation, but that you do you tread lightly. You try to figure out a way that is faithful to the people that you serve, while also pushing them to think a little bit more deeply, a little bit more humanely, to see the divine image on all of us. And so for doing that, charity can never be the conversation starter. I'll say this. My children are growing up in a house where their father knows the names of the people that they see on the streets. And that for me is very important. That they know that those people outside are not the homeless or the poor. And I think until we get to a place as faith communities where we don't see the people that we're supposed to intentionally be in relationship with as the poor or charity receivers, we'll have nothing to say. So for me, justice is being with those people. That to me is the incarnation story that Christians have bought into, is being among the people that you want to serve, living among them, understanding them, knowing them intimately. That's for me, our foundational text as a church is in Luke 14, and it tells Jesus is at this house with a bunch of religious rulers, and he's telling them, don't invite your rich friends and neighbors to your next banquet, invite the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, because they can't repay you. For us, we're in relationships with people because they benefit us in some way. They make us feel better in some way. And then when we engage with the poor, the crippled, the lame, the blind, the homeless, the other, the transgender, the black person, it's charity. And it's not understanding. I think justice flows out of understanding. So for me, it's about intimacy. Who do you know? Who are you in a relationship with? And does that inform the way that you move in the world? And I think you were speaking to that, right? You're listening to your teens. They're saying this is a major issue for us, and it's okay. We're listening. How do we live into that?
I think it's language again. A lot of it goes back to language. I ran a program in Florida called Project Downtown. It was basically just getting, the teenage kids were like, there's a lot of homeless people downtown that don't have things. We want to do something.
Yeah.
So we put together a program for them to do that. And I stressed them from day one, like, you're not at a zoo, all right? These aren't animals that you're throwing food at a zoo. These are people with real problems and real life stories. And I don't want you to just throw food at these people. I want you to learn their names. I want you to ask them questions. I want you to learn what brought you here. Right? Like, we met a guy who was a doctor 2 years ago, was living in a Cadillac, had put 4 kids through college, and now those kids wouldn't even give him a place to sleep on his couch. I know those details about his life, and so does every teenager that was in that group, because you care. You're not giving charity, you're providing a service.
Yeah.
We have the warming center that we're opening that goes along with the MALIC Center. And we don't call it's not a homeless charity. It's a warming center and services center. We don't provide mailboxes for people who don't have one because it's charity. It's a service we call it's called Fard, which means community responsibility. I know as a Muslim that you need this, and that makes it my responsibility to provide it for you. Nobody should have to tell me that to do it. Like zakat historically was something that, during Ramadan, a tax collector didn't come and knock on your door and say, okay, well, how much money did you make this year? Pay me. No, the man would go down into the street, and he would go to the grocer, and he would say, give me the bill for the 3 people who need it the most. And he would pay their debts. And that was how you paid your taxes. You didn't pay your taxes to a bureaucracy that kept 3/4 of the money and gave you give them $1 and they give 75 cents to each other so that they could all pat each other on the back about giving the poor man a quarter. It was direct. We gave direct. Everything was given directly. And you're taught, give with the right hand so that the left hand does not know. So you can't be giving to feel good about yourself. It's your job. This isn't a thing that you do because it makes you feel all jolly. It's your job. God will look at you on the day of judgment and say to you, there was a homeless man who sat in front of your business. What did you feed him? What clothing did you buy him? Did you invite him in out of the cold? He was your test. I gave you that store and that wealth that you have as a test. You failed your test. It's not charity. It's never charity. If it's given as a part of your faith, if it's given to please God, it's not charity. It's your job. It's your job and your job and your job. If you say you believe in the God of Abraham that says that it's our job to take care of the poor, the needy, the sick, the downtrodden, the politically repressed, and you don't do it, then you are simply shirking a responsibility.
Yeah.
That's it. You're not being charitable.
There's also in the prophet Isaiah, there's this, I love this saying. I think it's either 58 or 56. You'll have to look it up on your own. I'm not that great a sword drill guy. Evangelical joke. It says, don't turn your back on your own flesh. And it's in relation to the poor and the oppressed. The idea is that that's me outside. And so when someone says thank you, you're like, well, you would have done it for me. We're the same. So I don't care who you are. You're my flesh and blood. You're outside, that's me outside. So it's do it like it's your job or like your life depends on it. Because
your afterlife does.
Yeah, it does depend on it.
The life that matters to people of faith does. This is the prison that we're all locked in, waiting for the opportunity to live the life we're supposed to have. And every single thing from the money, if I'm a rich man because God gave me that money to test me as to whether or not I will use it the right way. He gave me some of your wealth. If you're sleeping on a park bench, I have your wealth. God gave it to me. It's my job to give it to you. I'm literally God gave me these good things, and I am simply I'm the one that goes through. And if I don't, then I am stealing from you. I am keeping what you deserve. God gave it to me to give to you, and I've been a bad khalif. I've been a bad khulafa, a bad custodian of your wealth because I kept it from you when it was yours.
I really love everything that you guys have said in terms of the need for this to be about relationships and an everyday thing, and not about a specific activity like, I'm doing this task because I'm giving something to them, or, and that's separate from me. These are crucial concepts, I think, for all of us in both faith and justice where they are separate. I would actually add a slightly different kind of perspective, sort of more in the long view, looking towards the future. And I do this from the perspective primarily of my socialist organizing work. One of the, and this is very aspirational, in the Socialist Party of Southern New Hampshire, we are very new and we are very small. We're covering a territory basically from Vermont to the seacoast. And, so it's not even just one community that we're dealing with. We're dealing with multiple and even varied types of communities, from the more urban in places like Manchester to, places like Francistown that are very rural. What we are aiming for, though, philosophically, one thing that we share in common is that we adopt a strategic philosophy that some know is called dual power. And the idea behind dual power is that there are a couple of different types of institution that we want to build alongside people who need them. Some of them are going to be defensive, some of them are going to be disruptive. I'll give you an example on that. The easiest example is something like housing. Right? You have, in New Hampshire, this is a very relevant issue because we do have a housing shortage, particularly among young people. The ability to afford a home for purchase is plummeting, really, statistically. And this is a state that is kind of built around homeownership and not rentals. So we have a shortage of rental units, and it's very much a landlord's market, you might say. So one of the ways that socialists would address these things is in the defensive side. This would be like a tenants union. This would be organizing the tenants of a particular area to come together and speak amongst themselves to, use their power in numbers to better their situations materially and economically, and to, leverage their power against the few landlords. Now, the flip side of that would be a disruptive type of institution, which would be a housing co-op. It would be the foundation of a, be it through, purchasing existing property, or in some cases building from scratch. You actually see it. There's a number of these that exist already in the state, a lot of which are mobile home communities that are cooperatively owned. They are not paid to a landlord. The tenants collectively own the property and thus control their own destiny. Now, an important thing, this is what, sorry for the long-winded explanation here, but the important thing with this concept as regards to charity versus service and versus empowering people is that the idea is not for the Socialist Party of Southern New Hampshire or any other socialist group to run these groups or to establish them on behalf of the tenants who need them. The idea is to help facilitate the tenants who live in these areas to take control of their own destiny by helping them to facilitate these groups. And when these organizations and structures are established, to step back and not run them. This is something that is practiced very heavily by the Philly Socialists. They're an organization in Philadelphia, not part of a particular party, but they kind of stand on their own. And they do this. They have established a very large and robust tenants union in Philadelphia, and they don't run it. Their people are not at the head of that organization. They helped start it and turned it over to the tenants that now run it. And I think that applies as an organizer as well as for institutions of faith, because churches and mosques and other existing organizations often have the already organized capacity to help to foster these types of climates and these types of institutions where people can better their own life. People can increase their own liberty without it coming down from the top or coming from us, where we are facilitating their ability to grow and better themselves. And we believe that that's something that can spread all throughout society and change the world ultimately.
Anybody have a response to that, or want to add on to
I think he
that?
was the last one adding.
What's
I
that?
think he was the last one adding.
We can keep going on that topic if you want to.
Unless I just got killed.
Well, I mean that does bring me to the question of what would be your vision of, we're everybody sitting here, probably everyone in the audience knows that there are big problems that we all have to grapple with in our own ways. So what is your vision? What's your dream? What's your hope that your work can change in the world?
Oh, wow.
It's a big one.
So, I mean, because I've worked on so many different things to change, like I've worked on, I've spent the last year of my life touring around the country lecturing on immigration to conservative audiences and, letting them know when you said just follow the law, what does that really mean? And, do you think that someone like me should have to have a government's gun put in my face and have $8,000 taken from me to get permission to marry my wife because she came from Africa, and not have them threaten to take my children in the middle of the night, That's a very important thing to me. So I've been spending a lot of time focusing on that. So I mean, I'd love to see immigration policies in this country be changed before I die. And my sons, if they met a girl from Pakistan or a girl from Kenya like their mother and fell in love, that they wouldn't have to go through the hell on earth that we had to go through of being basically extorted at gunpoint by the federal government for permission for her to stay here. I would love to. I worked with police accountability before police accountability was cool. I helped with the founding of the National Cop Block Network, where we were, it was cop block activists that filmed the films that the Black Lives Matter people were angry about. They got arrested for making those films, and they basically kind of got forgotten in that whole thing. But, I would love to see the work of police accountability groups finally actually do something, and there be accountability in our country again on the issue of legal justice, where, legal justice is now, did you harm someone? Here's, your property back, not, did you make somebody mad in a bureaucratic position? Well, we're going to steal a whole bunch of money from you and throw you in debtor's prison if you can't. And we're going to use law as a way to keep racial and religious minorities down like we have for the last 150 years. I'd like to see those things change. I'd like to see most Americans wake up to the fact that, the power that we beg to give to the state to use on one issue will then be used to oppress our neighbors and others. There's a lot of things that I would love to see change before I leave this earth. I'm not particularly confident that it will, because we've been arguing about these issues since I was born. I mean, I'm 37 almost, and we have been arguing about immigration since before Reagan. The president who was in office when I was born. We've been arguing about abortions that long. We've been arguing about gay rights issues that long. The race issue has been as bad. Police accountability has been as bad for the last 30 years, my entire lifespan. So unfortunately, and there have been people out there working. MALIC Shabazz is out there working on police accountability. You had the Black Panther movement working on this stuff in the 60s. It's 60 years later, and we're still fighting this battle. So I mean, my kids might win. Our kids might win. I'm not particularly, faithful that we will win. But I would like to see those things happen.
I'm going to change the question a little bit before I move on. What do you see as the root of the problems? Have you ever considered that it might be capitalism? I have to ask this as a representative of the Socialist Party. You can say no, you've never considered it. But I want to throw that out there. And if not, what is the root, in your opinion? We'll come back to you.
Well, I will say, so I appreciated getting the capitalism question emailed to us because I've been mulling that one over, at least. And going over all of my sources, at least for me, it seems as if when looking at Christian tradition, it is highly ambivalent, if not moderately hostile to what we're describing as postmodern or early modern capitalism as we know it. That there is a problem inherent in what we're describing in these systems. So I'll take the bold stance that I think Christianity, at least as my forebears are practicing it, would be hostile to what we're describing as United States capitalism in a really real sense. Is that the root? At least partly. I would say that the idea that power is being distributed in the form of money, resources, and political capital in a small number of people, I think, for especially my UCC Congregationalists, even puritanical forebears would say yes, that this is at least one of the root problems is that a small number of people have decided they're in charge and are not allowing the rest of us to participate in what feels like a important human effort to democratically or at least communitarily engage in this process that we're supposed to be doing together. At least my reading of early Christian texts would say we're supposed to be doing this together. This is not one person in charge. And I would say that that's a problem. And it's manifesting as capitalism, at least as one problem, especially this disaster capitalism that we're describing right now, where a small number of people continue to take lots and lots of money under really bizarre pretenses in some fashion and not help distribute that either politically or economically to the rest of us. So yes, as a descendant of the early English dissenters in a real fashion, I would say yeah, let's do that.
The root. Okay, so I would say no. Capitalism is not the root of our problem. I would say empire is, and that is the strand that runs throughout all of our faiths. And capitalism, as you said, is the modern manifestation. And so it is our system that perpetuates the rich getting richer, the poor getting poorer. That is the system. It is bad. It is antithetical to all of our faiths, in my opinion, at least the manifestation that we see it. Is socialism the response or the answer? All I know is this. The earliest followers of Jesus, their initial response to what they described as the Holy Spirit descending upon them and this movement giving birth was to share all their possessions and to have everything in common. And so from my perspective, whatever that looks like, it's not empire. It's not one person or a group of people dominating others. It's a shared community. We are and have been moving further and further away from that. That's just basic human life, in my opinion. I think we are moving further and further away from that as we evolve towards some kind of distance from one another that is going to be, I think, far worse than capitalism. But I do think that it's a sick system. I think I can understand why people thought it might be a decent idea. But I don't really think it jives very well with caring well for other people. Like, it's going to cause people to fall off, for people to be marginalized. But I don't believe it's the root of the problem. I think it's just the most modern manifestation of humans gathering together on large scales. Somebody is going to take charge and tell everyone else where they fit. That's just my opinion. Although I do like the idea of socialism, because I think that's our earliest and most beautiful picture of that early Jesus-following community. Yeah, that's how I feel.
So I actually like the question being posed as whether or not it's the root, because I do think it's actually a complex answer. I believe that people love more fully and lead lives that are more directly connected to the divine when they're free, when they have freedom, when they have the most liberty. And I believe that means when we're saying free, we mean freedom from want. We mean freedom from oppression, and that oppression can be political, cultural, and often is economic. And when we go back far enough, we talk about Jesus being revolutionary. Well, and he had legitimate things to fight against, to rebel against, and that's why he was killed. But at the time of Jesus, capitalism wouldn't exist for another 1,500 years. That was not a real thing. And when you go through history with that broad view, looking at it over centuries, when capitalism came into existence, it was an increase in freedom and liberty. The emergence of capitalism and markets and the disruption of the aristocracy and the reliance on just monarchy, this was a tremendous innovation. This was an increase in freedom and liberty, and actually did increase the amount of equality that people had, from where it was before. Now, we're in a place where capitalism's been around for a few hundred years, and it is now in the way. It is impeding our progress in order to go forward. We are in a state of essentially arrested development, where the potential that has been generated through the Industrial Revolution, through the technologies that have truly been made possible through capitalism. That let's not kid ourselves, the productive capacity, the technological level of that can be put to use in ways that contribute to freedom and contribute to equality and allow us all to live free of economic and other oppressions. It is made possible through the innovations of capitalism. But now we're in a position where if we are to build a better world, we are stuck here. If we rely on capitalism, if we stay within, the idea that, it's okay if some people own everything. It's okay if the wealthy, not only hoard all of the resources, but, basically hold the levers of government and the state, and lead to situations where people are pointing guns at you and threatening to take your kids away for absolutely no reason. Because we are stuck on these totally arbitrary ideas of borders and nations, and things that are separating the world community. And so in the entire grand scheme of humanity, obviously capitalism can't be the root because it's a relatively new innovation. But today, I think it must be transcended. We must be able to go beyond it to, in my belief, that's a socialist system that we're talking about. If we do not do that, all of these things that we've been talking about that we want to promote as part of our faith, we can't do. We're stuck. We're inhibited by it. So that's how I would answer that question is, yes, it is a major obstruction to our work in building the kind of world that we want to see. We can't do it within capitalism.
I think because it's a drug.
Yeah.
I think I just like to think of it as the Matrix. I just think it's easier that way. Right, so you can't understand. It feels like people telling you that you can achieve this because look, that one guy did it, or that one woman got up. It's so seductive that way.
Definitely.
That I think that's the big problem. It's seduction. It's like a.
Well, I would argue that capitalism has existed, or at least in Eastern cultures, far longer than just 500 years. You had major investment style firms that existed in ancient Arabia. Sure. The Prophet saw himself as a merchant. He took, products from point A to point B, collected money for them. That's how he ended up getting married to begin with. He was a good merchant. But Islam also says that a good businessman is putting an eye. It's like the whole the rich man through the eye of the camel through the eye of the needle thing. It's the same thing with a good businessman. That if a man who is a businessman, is a capitalist, is a merchant, and does good business, that's more pleasing to God than the martyr who sheds his blood, because it's so rare that a man get involved in mercantile and in business and remain a faithful person. As for, like, for the modern context, for me, the state is actually that root. Because when we look at the situation, or at least most people, what they see is Exxon went in and took the land. Capitalism is bad. But what they don't see is, well, actually what happened was 100 years ago, England's government took the land and then sold it back to the people who live there at interest. And though that was secured by a bank, and the two governments made a contract with each other and didn't ask the people of either government what they thought about what was going on there. And then when the loan came due, now Exxon goes in and takes the land because the government can't pay off the debt. But without the government A coming in and taking the land to start with, mean, nasty corporation can't go in and take the land because it's not been taken by the government. So what we have is we've empowered empire. As he said, it's empire. We've empowered our states, our governments, to the point that they now have the ability to go off and just economically rape the entire world and create permanent welfare states for the taxpayers in Western governments. My wife's from Kenya. They took her country from her ancestors. They literally sold it back to them at interest. That was their freedom of Kenya. Yeah. The revolutionary freedom was, we'll sell you your country back that we stole from you to start with. And then the famine started. And when the famine started, they just kept giving aid. They're not taking our money and our stuff and giving it to these people so that they can survive. There's an interest rate that's tacked onto that. It's expected to be repaid. And now there are more famines today because the land that's farmland, the prime farmland in Kenya, is now used to grow organic vegetables for European markets. So while hundreds of thousands of Kenyans die in the street of starvation, Europeans are getting fat off of organic vegetables that are grown in Kenyan land. But that would have never happened to the government of the United States and the government of the United Kingdom not went in there and secured those loans for that aid to start with. So without one hand washes the other, you can't have what most socialists call capitalism, the evil of capitalism. You can't have that without the evil of government. So if you empower one, you have to acknowledge that to empower one is to empower the other. And as long as we are willing to sit by and accept imperialism, accept that the United States owns Puerto Rico. Right. We won't make a mistake. We won't give them the rights of the state. But right. Puerto Rico, we own Puerto Rico. We own Guam. We own the Keene Islands. We literally bombed them off the map. Yep. And as long as Americans like you and me are willing to just sit there and be like, yeah, that kind of happened. Well. So what wonder are we voting for in the Democrat Republican Party this year?
Exactly. And you know what? I don't disagree with what you just said at all.
And so we can argue about capitalism and socialism and all of these things until we're blue in the face, until we get down to the brass tacks. That the people that we vote for and put in the office, they're the root of the problem. It's not got anything to do with the man that owns the business. It's not got anything to do with the man who votes. It's got to do with the people that we put in power and the fact that they grease the wheels for all of these other evil people that exist on the next rung lower than them. And if it weren't for the fact that we tolerate them setting the stage for AT&T and GE and Boeing and all these other companies, we wouldn't have the problems we have today.
See, the only way that I see things differently from that is that I would simply say that these, when I talk about the state, I don't see it as separable from capitalism. I mean, I believe that the state essentially exists to enforce a class hierarchy, to enforce the interests of those with money, the capitalist class. So imperialism, in particular, a great example when it comes to Kenya and how that land is farmed and everything else. I would say that it's not, the state by itself doesn't necessarily have incentive to do that. It's the state acting on behalf of the interests of the capitalist class who profits from the sale of Kenyan vegetables in Europe, which no ordinary person can really take part in that.
I would agree with that if I didn't come from East Tennessee and hadn't literally seen them do the exact opposite of that. Where I live, we have what they call the Tellico Village now. What they did was about a year before I was born, they went in and they confiscated 300,000 acres of some of the most prime farmland on the face of the earth. They literally took it from farmers and kicked them off of their land. It was for the betterment of the community. that they literally stole people's farms and kicked elderly people who had lived in these farms for their entire lives out in the street. They just left that land fallow for over a decade.
Wow.
Then a senator said from another state was like, you know what? We've been paying a lot of money to get rid of ORNL's waste. Let's just dump it there. So then we're going to take this prime farmland that they literally stolen from these people, and we're going to turn it into toxic waste. Then later someone comes and says, well, you know what? If you'll build a dam and flood it, we'll buy that land from you that you paid 33 cents an acre for, and we'll give you top dollar for it, and we'll turn around and sell it for $250,000 for half of an acre. And we'll call it prime beachfront property, and Arnold Schwarzenegger will own a house there. He does, by the way.
Wow.
And so the money and interest weren't involved in that. The state just decided we want to do this.
Well, it seems like they were involved on some level.
They 15 years later when they came, and they were like, well, don't turn it into a toxic waste dump, sell it to us.
Yeah.
But not knowing the whole story, the point is, it was clearly not in the interest of the people who lived there.
No,
Right.
And so
People have no say.
That's what
They were doing it on behalf of the TVA, which is not a business.
Right.
It's a government
That's true.
entity.
Yep.
The government entity said, we want to build another dam so that we can. There's literally another dam, a 400-yard walk from the TVA dam. There's the TVA dam and there's the Loudon Marina dam, and they are literally less than a mile from each other. And it was just because the TVA decided we want to show that we have the power to do this. We're going to flex our muscle. We'll show you we can just take farms.
Yeah.
And they did it 4 separate times from the beginning of the New Deal to 1979. They just came in and stole families' farms. And there were no businesses that were going to profit from it. The state profited from it. The utility companies that were owned by the government profited from it. The TVA profited from it. No private industry profited.
Yeah, and there are certainly instances of things like that, as well as instances of bureaucratic incompetence that we talk about that does come directly from the state, and it's not just
malice, indifference, or incompetence. If you're dealing with government, you get to deal with one of those.
Absolutely, if not more than one.
Corporate customer service, the same thing.
Yeah.
Malice, indifference, or incompetence. Those are your choices. It's funny how they literally function the same way.
They do. And I would just say, I would trace that back to the idea that the government is not run on behalf of the people. So even when they are taking actions that may not be directly related to greasing the wheels for the class lowest, next lower down that you were talking about, this isn't real democracy. And when we talk about socialism, that's really what we want to promote. We want to abolish the state.
That sounds like syndicalism to me then.
Well, in a way, the joke is usually that the difference between an anarchist and a Marxist is simply like, how long it takes to get to anarchism, essentially. How long it takes to get to a stateless society.
Right.
When
the real difference between an anarchist and a Marxist is their view on private property.
So, as much as I am excited to sit here and talk about this, this is really fun, and I knew it would be, but I promised us all that we wouldn't go too far down the political road, and it's getting a little late, so I wanted to see if anyone in the audience had maybe 1 or 2 quick questions before we have to move all these chairs and get out of here. And if the answer is no, that's fine too.
I'm kind of curious about having a mosque in a town like Keene, especially in the environment that we have in this country. Do you feel like you're in danger at all? Threatened at all by the fact that where the political climate is right now?
If you saw my gun cabinet, you wouldn't ask that question. So if you saw my gun cabinet, you wouldn't ask that question. No, not really. I mean, I grew up in East Tennessee. What can Keene do that I haven't had thrown at me in Eastern Appalachia? I mean,
In Massachusetts, we call this the South of the North.
Really?
Yeah.
Well, so far the rocket has been great by everybody but city bureaucrats. The townspeople themselves seem to be really, really amped about the fact that we're here. City bureaucrats have given us a little bit of runaround, but they're changing their tune very quickly now. I guess because they see that the community is really happy about the fact that we're opening a mosque here. The building was donated by people that live in Keene. A lot of volunteer work to help get the building open has been donated by people of Keene, and local Keene businesses have donated to help feed our volunteer staff that comes out and helps. Like we've been remodeling a building, we've been tearing down drywall and putting in new, painting and ripping up flooring and putting in beautiful carpet that we had imported from Turkey, so we've had a great response from the local community. I'm not afraid at all. I mean, there is a sign on the front door that says that we audio and video record, and if you carry a gun, we are very happy to have you come and visit. Just if you need to use it, please be very careful with how you aim. And that's that. But I'm from East Tennessee. That's just me. That's my call. I come from a culture where we have more guns. We have. The only reason why Texas has more guns than Tennessee is because it's 3 times the size. So to me, feeling scared is, am I worried someone's going to come to my house and be able to harm my family? No, because if I know someone tries to kick my door and I can put a hole almost the size of my door in the back of them before they ever make it to the door. I'm not worried. I'm a defend yourself kind of guy. You won't see us with a police officer sitting in front of a mosque because there was a terrorist attack 2 weeks ago and all the community members are scared. That's just not the way I plan on running my community. We are on a main highway, and we're here, we're Muslim, we have literally no fear, and if there's anyone in any community that wants to change that and wants to make me be afraid of them, I welcome the opportunity for them to come and make me scared to be in Keene. Because there are so many people in that community that support our mosque and support the fact that we're opening, that if someone came and tried to start trouble at our mosque, I have without any doubt whatsoever, we would have 100 people there in 24 hours from 3 states standing up for our community. People from this very room, I believe, would be there. So I'm not scared at all. I'm literally as far the opposite of that as you can be. I'm empowered, and I'm happy to be here, and Chris Cantwell can live 2 doors down the road from us all he wants to. It doesn't bother me a bit. Anybody else?
All right, thank you all for coming. Thank you to Chris, Dave, Will, and Rick for being on the panel.
And thank you to Zoe for
Thank you.
doing that.